Lisa and I are here to give you a briefing on two different but very much related topics. One is the update process and the status of that process for the comprehensive plan. Paul will be providing good information. You have handouts for that. The top item is a summary packet for information of changes, and Paul will walk through that.
I'm having trouble hearing you over these fans. I don't know if your mic is on or if...
I think this mic is on.
To you, maybe. Sorry.
I think the fan can be turned off too, but I'm not.
Oh.
Yep.
Oh, hello.
Fan man.
There it is.
Thank you.
It just says fan on it?
Yeah. The one that says fan, yeah. Okay, yep. And Paul will bring us through the update process and the status of that and the schedule to move forward with on the comprehensive plan update. And then I will pick up on the specifics of the transportation plan update that is related to the comprehensive plan, but it's a separate document, separate process, and I'll be able to explain that to you. So with that, I think I'll hand it off to Paul, and we can jump right into this.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us. As David said, I'm going to describe the process we've been undertaking for the minor update to the comprehensive plan. To get started, just to give a little background, with the comprehensive plan, we do major updates every 10 years. And so for this document, the last major update was done in 2011. The minor update that we're doing at this time is looking at the document and basically doing a refresh of that material, not a replacement. So we look at different demographics and things that have happened over the last 5 years, basically affirming a lot of the major assumptions that have been included in that comprehensive plan. And then we did look at the land use, growth assumptions, and then other important new items that are happening in the community. And so that's been part of this refresh process. And as David said, the comp plan update is coordinated with the long-range transportation plan. And the land use and growth assumptions that are in place with the comprehensive plan are then used in the long-range transportation plan assumptions and process moving forward. So a little on the LRTP. Again, this is a parallel process with the comp plan, as I said, based on those growth assumptions and land use. And as an MPO, the federal government requires that we do an LRTP every 5 years to receive those federal dollars for our projects. The last one was completed 5 years ago, so that would have been 2011 with the major update of the comp plan. As far as the process goes for both, the Planning Commission has been serving an advisory role through this process. We also do have a staff of an oversight planning committee that has met regularly and given input and advice on this process as well. The LRTP side of this effort is also supported by FHU, which is a consulting firm, and they've provided a lot of the technical pieces to this process. And then as we move forward in an adoption phase throughout the rest of this year, the Planning Commission will look at both of those documents and make recommendations to this body as well as the County Board for the comprehensive plan. And then for the LRTP, that will go on to the MPO for final adoption. So with regards to the comp plan, we did establish some assumptions with the Planning Commission towards the end of last year, so coming up on a year. But those assumptions included maintaining the horizon year of 2040. So the name of the comp plan is LPlan 2040, and as a minor update, we feel it's still relevant and significant to keep that horizon year for a couple of reasons. There is enough land for the projected growth and development needed to serve our community's needs up to the year 2040. And then along with that and tied closely with that growth, the utility master plans that have been adopted and that are in place won't need to have major updates themselves. And so we can continue that growth pattern up to that year. In another 5 years, though, we'll be talking about the major update process again, and should we be looking out to maybe a year 2050 type of horizon. In terms of population and household projections, the population figures for the last 5 years that we have received are on track with the projections in the plan, and so that's good that that's in place, and we'll continue that. And that population growth is roughly 1.2% annually. The household size is larger than what's been projected. The number of households themselves have continued to grow, but not at a pace that's been projected in the plan. It's slightly slower, but because we have larger household sizes, that's meaning that we have more people living together in a single household. Households are important because that equates to occupied dwelling units, and that's something that we track closely with the comp plan. We also assume that 90% of the population will continue to reside within Lincoln. 4% will be in incorporated villages, and 6% will be developed on acreages or other. Within Lincoln, looking at the split of residential units, we are continuing the assumption of 40% multifamily units. If we look at the past 5 years, it's actually greater than that. The longer-term trend does still hover around 40%. And then we're also looking at maintaining 8,000 units of infill, and I'll show you that on a map as well. And that's also on track with the past 5 years growth of infill that we've had. This slide has a lot of text on it, but I'm just going to touch on a couple of these things. Your handout packet that says vision and plan with the number 1 on it. These are the specific changes that are proposed throughout the chapters in the comp plan. So this slide here just touches on these slightly. But again, we have updated the numbers throughout the plan having to do with population and dwelling units. That 8,000 unit infill number does equate to an increase in percentage of infill from 16 to 20%. We've also added reference to adopted plans that have been approved over the last 5 years. There's an updated entryways map as projects have been implemented. And then there's just a number of other projects that are completed or underway throughout the community. In working with those departments and getting their updates, we've reflected that in this refresh of the plan. So looking at this map, what this is our growth tier map. And maybe helpful if we get up and point out a couple of these things. So this black and white line that kind of surrounds this area is our future service limit, and that's that 2040 limit that I had mentioned before that we anticipate growing out to up to the year 2040. So the utility master plans that are in place can provide services out there, and the growth projections we have in the plan provide for that land needed. So we worked with property owners and developers within this area and asked them, in terms of growth and development, what kind of interest do we have here? We do have some demand in certain areas of town for additional residential. Through that process and through what we received from those folks, we are supporting a couple proposals. One of those has to do with the Stevens Creek area, East O Street, basically 98th Street, and then back down to Van Dorn area, which is here. And that was a transition from priority C to priority B, meaning that that area could be served by those city services within the next 10 years, and that there is interested property owners and developers wanting to build out in that area. Another one that we had received and do support is in the southwest area of Lincoln over here. The Southwest Village development was approved several years ago and is annexed and approved for commercial uses today. And really this has been a slow growth area. The property owners and developers had said, well, we could really build out some additional residential units here in support of that approved commercial area. And there is a study underway for the sanitary sewer line to be served over there in terms of what size and design does that need to be.
Before you leave this slide. When we put together those numbers during the 2011 process, the downtown numbers we thought were pretty aggressive, but we've seen the influx of many new residential complexes downtown, whether they're student housing or otherwise. Aren't we on pace to really hit that target pretty soon? Can you speak to that a little bit and why the number stayed 3,000?
Yes, I think that the greater downtown numbers could probably surpass the 3,000 mark. And if that happens, then that's not a bad thing either. we do have existing infrastructure in place and continue to support that redevelopment in downtown. And there's many places throughout the document that says, central existing sites should be redeveloped into higher intensity uses and density. And downtown is definitely a place that would be supported. So if it does exceed the 3,000 mark, great. I think a more intense study of this growth scenario is probably going to happen with the major update in 5 years. Even in advance of that, we do monitor those numbers weekly as building permits come in and approved plans come in. So.
Where are we with those numbers in infill downtown? If you
I'm trying to think off the top of my head the actual number. There's a unit number and there's a beds number, and that makes a difference with the student housing. But I do know that it is in right around 2,000 recently. I guess the other point of clarification on this information that you're asking about is what this new updated plan is saying is we're resetting that total 8,000 infill number. So it's basically going back to 0 starting now, going out to 2040. So we're basically saying all of those units already happened as far as infill is concerned. And then what we're saying is now for the next 24-year period, we can afford to get another 8,000 for infill. So it's not less units. It's actually it's a new 8,000.
starting today, or
Correct.
whenever you publish the update?
Correct.
Wow.
So it's going in 2011 when we adopted the plan, it was 16% of new units moving forward were for infill. This one is suggesting that it would be 20%. And we actually have more than that has happened in the last 5 years, more than the 20% of total units.
How does, when it's publishes, how do you account for that? Like, it sounds like you mean that in downtown would be 3,000 plus the 2,000 that have already been achieved, roughly. Is that what you're saying? That there would actually be a 5,000 total
Yeah, it could be.
cumulative infill by
Sure.
2040?
And that would be just for the greater downtown. I mean, then there's the rest of the city too.
Thinking that because
Yeah.
remember that number from
Right.
2011. So the comp plan, will it ultimately say that from the time it was first put together in 2011, or is it just a rolling?
We have those numbers that we can share that with you with the specifics of all the locations and the numbers of units and beds. But I guess the point is that we're basically acknowledging that we're actually, our infill for the last 5 years has been even greater than the 20% that we're suggesting now. And we don't see that completely slowing down. I think John had a question.
When you talk about 8,000 units, what constitutes a unit? For example, you've got the student housing with 4 bedrooms on a center
Right.
area. How many units is that?
Technically, that would be 1 unit. So as we know, the student housing is a little bit of a different animal, especially the type of units, some of the units that we're seeing now, which is the 4-bedroom, which is quite a bit of density compared to what a lot of different more traditional apartments would be. But technically, that would be 1 unit, which is why we do our best to track the number of beds as well. So we do have part of that tracking. When we can get that information, it does tell us how many beds are in those units. It helps us, it informs us more about what's happening and where that way.
Okay. And this is another important map that we've looked at with this update. This is the land use map. So again, kind of going through the process of what's happened over the last 5 years. Do we have cleanup to this? We do receive some amendments to this over time as developments occur. And so a number of these items were kind of cleanup. But then we also did do some more outreach, and it had received some interest from, again, owners of property to propose some changes to this. And there were a couple of them that I'll just point out again on the map. One of them is the 70th and Yankee Hill area. There is a pipeline in Yankee Hill, and we did show on this map adjacent to that there was a designation of urban residential there. And working with that owner and recognizing the pipeline exists there in the planning area, we do support a change of residential to commercial along that Yankee Hill frontage. Another request that we had was up in Northwest Lincoln area in what was called the Ring Neck development, so Northwest 48th and West Holdridge. That area has been designated as commercial and industrial for quite some time, and is approved, if annexed, to develop with those uses. They haven't had interest out there for that type of a use, and so their request is to change to residential, and that's also supported. One of the changes in the county, which is shown on this existing and then proposed over here that I'll just mention, has to do with some low-density residential just outside of Hickman and Roca's jurisdictions. On the existing map here, this was a recent change that was approved for an acreage subdivision, and in looking at that and analyzing the area, we did an acreage study and kind of the growth and development of acreages in Lancaster County. And we did support filling in this area, which you see yellow down here, with additional low-density acreage development. Just a couple more slides on the comp plan. For both documents, we do have websites and all the materials available online at those keywords. And if you go to the committee tabs, all of that material is available there. And in terms of our schedule and process, we are working on our briefings for both of these efforts. And we'll have an open house next Tuesday in this room. And then following up throughout the rest of this year, again, will be that adoption process, coming back to the Planning Commission, and then we'll bring the comp plan through City Council and County Board for approval. Are there any other questions?
Just in looking at the maps, we continue to grow east, we continue to grow north, where there's a gap in southwest Lincoln. We aren't growing so much that direction. Is that, there are water issues, other transportation issues with railroads and things. Is that what's blocking growth in that direction?
Well, a lot of this is based on the utility master plans, and so with the sanitary sewer and the policy that's in place and has been in place for years, growth follows that drainage basin because of the sanitary sewer lines, and so a lot of the planning happens within those drainage basins. And so if we're going to look at expanding in a different direction outside of that established future service limit, we'll need to take a good look at those utility master plans and say, okay, this could be a multi-million-dollar sewer line out here. Is this what the community wants? And is this the direction we're going to grow? So that's basically the line that has been established through, many departments, and that's why you see that growth pattern that way.
I would add to that, Carl, that what Paul just went through, we are being a little bit more aggressive in that southwest area by basically saying we're going to get the sanitary sewer is the main need out there in that new red area, in this area right here, sooner rather than later. So I think part of what happens out there is that Highway 77 and the park kind of are a both physical and visual separation from the community. And until we get a little bit more critical mass out there, it's going to be hard to really have a lot more happen. But at least in this update of the plan, we are going to be opening up more land out there so that it can be developed, and we're going to see how that works out. But the indication is that there's very strong interest from those landowners to actually get both the commercial as well as the residential to start going out there.
Speaking of Wilderness Park, do you see any attempt ever to get another overpass of some kind so you get east-west connection? That's been a major concern of a lot of people.
Yeah, and it has been. And obviously I'll get into the transportation piece in a moment, but I can say that this plan does not foresee that happening. It's taken its cue from past decisions that's not a top priority to get that done. But I acknowledge that that's been discussed in the past, and there is that's part of that barrier that's out there. But at the same time, with the connections that we do have in intersections and interchanges with Highway 77, we do feel like it works, and the state has done that study, and they feel like it works for that purpose. So that's where the plan stands right now. on that topic.
As Carl was mentioning, that's just a big void in the circle if you want to try to get a concentric circle for Lincoln. And that's what I've heard, is that transportation, even with 77 and those intersections, if somehow it could be a compatible complementary type overpass or something that would be respectful of Wilderness Park land. It's more that east-west, because you have so much business and also the south.
And it's possible that that could be part of the discussion for the more major update beginning in about 4 years, because that would be a significant topic of discussion, obviously. Just to point out one clarification is that, and this gets into, I mean, in the past, there has been a lot of discussion about concentric growth and things like that. Really where we're at and where we've been for about 10 years or 15 years now is more multi-directional, not necessarily concentric. So to have less growth happening in one area versus another is actually how the plan's set up now. But we are trying to keep an eye on that so that there is at least different pieces of the market can actually have a role in the growth of the community.
What did you guys spend the most time discussing? Like, what issues had the most debate in the updating process? Planning. These are just the planning commission and staff, correct?
Yeah,
Yes, do you-
we worked with other departments on this to get, like I said, updates on their projects or things that were up and coming. I don't know if I'd necessarily call anything a debate with this process, but it was more along the lines of just continuing the vision of what was laid in place 5 years ago. We did have a couple of new projects added in terms of the text changes, knowing that, for example, the Emerald Ash Borer is at Lincoln's doorstep. Okay, so in that sense, we put some text in there saying at some point there needs to be some sort of a response plan. But again, that's in the broad text of, we know this is coming. It doesn't lay out what that is, but we recognize it, we acknowledge it in the plan. So that was a new topic. Yeah, like I said, I think it was just kind of focused on these more minor updates and reflecting what's happened over the 5 years period.
And we spent, heavy lifting happened on the transportation plan part of this time, so that's where the rest of the answer there. So.
Questions on this piece, or should we move on to the transportation?
Okay, now the fun part. Sorry, shouldn't say that. Sorry. Okay. So very much in coordination and compatibility, we had the update of the transportation plan. As Paul mentioned initially, this is a required, every 5 years, a requirement from the federal government for us to qualify for federal funding, both on the transit side as well as the road side, and for trail funding and things like that. So it's important for us to do this. We also feel like this is good planning. We should refresh our plan every 5 years or so. That's a good thing to do. We should ask the questions about what the priorities are of our community. So we feel both it's a requirement and it's good planning. So we did take this on. We began this work with FHU, our consultant on this, over a year ago now, as far as beginning process on the technical side. A big part of this is to identify a funding plan which really reflects what our current and expected revenues are for transportation. And then coming up with a fiscally constrained plan. That's the main requirement from the federal government, to make sure that what we put in the plan, what we say we're actually going to try to do, we can afford to do. It makes sense when you say it that way, but in the past, not all plans were really realistic about what we could do. We could put a lot of projects in there, but we never could really do them all, and then it was more of a just whoever wanted to do the most popular project. So this is a more sophisticated way of trying to identify how to get the best transportation system set up and built and maintained in the future. We have some specific things that are done with this, the travel demand forecast, which is the network of roads, and saying kind of how they're going to function in the future and what projects to try to build to help serve the community best. Air quality analysis is specific to the proposed plan, so that we have to make sure we stay in air quality attainment, which is not a problem for us, thankfully. It becomes a much more difficult and onerous transportation planning process when that happens, if that happens. We don't foresee that happening in the future. There is a very nice summary, 12-page summary in front of you that I'm going to be referencing as I walk through some of the information. I suggest that you use this as kind of your touchstone for this information. There is a 173-page technical report that's on our website as of tomorrow, I believe, tomorrow morning. You are welcome to read that. That is a kind of a dense topic. It gets into a lot of the details and the technical part of this, as well as process that was taken. It's a requirement. We feel we're proud of it. It is what we did. But this summary is really going to help you kind of get a feel for what this proposed plan has in it. Again, this is to be in compliance with federal regulations and to qualify for those federal funding sources. It does set a vision similar to the comprehensive plan. This is specific to transportation, but it is in the context of our overall land use plan and our growth plan. So they are one and the same when it comes to those topics. And so this is actually a very good example of what is a good way to do transportation planning. In a lot of communities, especially larger metropolitan areas, you have a separate entity, MPO, that does the transportation planning, and then they spend half their time trying to coordinate with the local jurisdictions and their local land use plans and growth plans. Here we have obviously one big city and one big county. It's a lot easier to do it here, and we feel like we do a pretty good job of kind of coordinating between transportation decisions and land use decisions. So we feel proud of that, and I think everybody should feel pretty good about our plans here. Another point to be made here is that from the 2011 plan over the last 5 years, we actually do implement projects that are identified in the plan. We do a good job of that. So some of the bigger projects that were identified as priorities were North 14th Street, Southwest 40th Viaduct, South 56th Street finally got done, Northwest 48th Street, and then the South Beltway being funded. Those are all projects that were on the top of the list last time, and we actually got those done or are getting those done right now. And then other highly ranked projects 5 years ago are in our CIP right now. So we have a good track history of actually getting projects done that we talk about with the plan process. So we should feel good about that, because otherwise we don't have that vision that really helps us determine where our money is going and what we're doing. Point you to page 3 of your summary. So this will get into kind of reiterating that we have a coordinated effort here with our land use plan. The data that is put into the transportation system and the plan effort and the modeling is our own land use. So we're not talking about different numbers. So we can feel confident that when it says that we're going to have X amount of traffic out on South 98th Street and Stevens Creek as we start to grow into that area, we feel good that that's reflecting what, as best you can, 20 years out into the future. We feel good that it's actually giving us some good information to make decisions on. This is a multimodal transportation plan, so it's roads, it's freight, it's transit, it's bicycle, it's pedestrian, and it's trying to strike that balance between those different modes, so it's important for us to keep that in mind as well. It is a performance-based plan, and what that means, this is a new requirement from the federal government, that we are to be much more aligned with identifying goals and objectives and then actually being able to report on those on a regular basis. So what we did here, and this is at the bottom of page 3 in your summary as well, these are the main goals that have been identified, and they make some sense. We're not really stretching ourselves a lot here, but what we have done a good job of is that many of these already have the data available to report on. And so what we're going to be able to do is actually be able to say every year or so, okay, this is what's going on and this is how we did. And I think that's important for us to be able to point to that type of information so that we're not just making these decisions without being informed. And it also is an opportunity for others to take a look at what we're doing and to understand what we're doing. We've had a few different phases of community involvement and input, which is very important for us. Otherwise, we don't have a good pulse on what the community is feeling about transportation. We first talked about what are the needs, which is a process that we took to kind of let people think big. What do we want to do? Where should we be going with our transportation investments, and kind of recording all that information. Then we had to go into a phase over the summer, really, of understanding what those priorities are. So we kind of forced those that were involved in our process to say, okay, you only have X amount of dollars. Where do you put those dollars? Where do you put your investment? And then so that was good information that we developed. And now we're in the point of validating the vision. So as Paul mentioned, we're going to have a public meeting next Tuesday. We're going to release all this information on our website with a big email blast tomorrow. That'll get it back out there, and we'll get as much input as we can moving forward. And then from that, some final changes, and then we'll go through the adoption process of the LRTP. So what we did for the community involvement and input, we actually had we used the Planning Commission for one thing as our touchstone through the process, as our kind of representatives of the community for planning. We also had an interdepartmental and interagency oversight committee that was very helpful in getting the work done itself. We also had 8 focus group meetings back in February of this year. That was back in that identifying the needs and what are different people thinking about transportation, and that was very informative early on in the process. We also have had a couple different public meetings throughout the process. And then when we were identifying those priorities, we used an online survey. Now, granted, it was self-selected, but we did get over 800 completed surveys back, and that was informative to help us identify what the priorities are of the community. And we really did use that information. It's not just saying we did an exercise and discounted what that said. We actually used that information to help shape the plan. Recurring themes. So this is kind of where what we use to kind of identify what we're going to try to accomplish over the next 24 years in our transportation plan. Technology came up over and over again. I think that's become not only a buzzword, but a reality in transportation. That the access to technology and the ability to use it to get more efficient has been a really strong theme right now. So when we start thinking about our fiber to the home and business project that's going on and be in place by 2019, that backbone infrastructure will be available for our transportation system as well, so that interconnected signals and being as efficient as possible with traffic through those intersections, especially those congested intersections, as well as just the information that's available to people to determine how to travel through the community. That's going to become a more and more important piece of how transportation happens, up to and including things like driverless vehicles, which we touch on in the new plan. We don't say that that's exactly how it's going to happen, but just a nod to the fact that technology is a growing piece of the discussion for transportation. Also growth. We're a growing community. That's a good thing. We want to continue to be a growing community. So where do we grow? How do we grow? That came up over and over again as well. And that obviously has a relationship back to the comprehensive plan directly. Changing demographics and travel preferences, aging baby boomers, young millennials, slightly different feeling of what they think about transportation and how they want to get around their community. That's taken into account here as well. Need for better north-south roads. It's a long-standing issue. We all know about that. Not an easy thing to fix, and not a cheap thing to fix either, but certainly came out from our process that we heard that as well. Number one item that came out was the maintaining and rehabbing our existing system. Maintain what we have and then move forward from there. That was the number one item that came out of our feedback. But there also was getting off of the street network a little bit. High value for our trail network, and then from that, a desire to build off of that and to get more on-street bicycle facilities. That was a recurring theme throughout our process. We literally had an online and physical in public meetings bucket exercise. We gave people $100, and we gave them some bigger categories to put their money into. They couldn't ask for more money, and they technically couldn't share their money either with somebody else. So what we heard from that is that everybody that got involved in that said this is not very easy, because a lot of these items are all high priorities, and so we heard that from those that participated. What we also heard and saw from the results is that there is a very strong desire for a balanced approach to this. There really wasn't any real lean one way or the other to say put all your money into program A and don't put any into program B. It was more, let's try to find a good balance between the different needs of our community. Everything from building new roads to maintaining and rehabbing our street system to providing a good transit system. So that was really a big message that we heard. So funding outlook. I'll refer you to page 6 now of your summary. This is where we get into the actual dollars. When we looked at our current and expected revenues over the next 24 years, we can confidently say that we should have somewhere in the range of $2.4 billion. It sounds like a big number, when it comes to transportation costs and needs over a 24-year period with inflation involved in that, does not account for everything that we would want to do or need to do. Just be honest about that. This is the basic breakdown of how that was set up. Of the $2.4 billion, $1.9 billion going towards roads programs, and then below the $1.9 billion figure on there, those are the different revenue streams that are used to fund that road program. Transit is $450 million, and that is FTA, Federal Transit Administration dollars, as well as some state revenues, and then fares, advertising, and contract revenue, and then as well as general revenues. And then the trail side, $36 million, much smaller piece, but still an important piece. That again, that also has some federal dollars attributed to it, some other local funding sources, private contributions that are part of that. And so what we do is we identify what we can reasonably expect for revenues and say how best to spend that money to have a balanced transportation system out to the year 2040.
You have the trail impact fees.
Yes.
Is there a separate impact fee for that, or is that carved out, or is that something you're anticipating?
No, we have a trail impact fee actually for the growth areas. So we get, it's not a big number, but often that money is used to match the available federal dollars for those trail projects. So that becomes a local match usually for those types of projects.
Just to clarify, David, maybe you said this number of $2 billion for a year period,
Correct.
2017 to 2040.
Correct.
You anticipate that total being spent or needed?
Well, that's the number that we have based on reasonable expectations of existing revenue sources and reasonable expectations of increasing those revenue sources. So it's everything that we can honestly say that we can expect to have to spend.
It's not the wish list,
Yeah.
it's what you consider fiscally constrained.
That's
investment.
correct. So building off that question and comment is we need to recognize that we have construction costs outpacing growth in our revenues. We have about 5% per year increase in costs on transportation projects. Our revenues are averaging about 2.5% per year increases, so about double the rate of growth of our revenues. And it's not the best and most fun topic to talk about, but it's something that we have to realize. Hopefully that 5% per year is not always that high. We'd love to see it go down. We could do more projects. We can get more done. But we have to acknowledge that that's been about the last 5-year experience of those project costs. We really are looking at maximizing the system's capacity with those dollars that we do have. Things like using technology to get more efficient through our intersections and our signaling. Making sure that we're rehabbing and maintaining as best as we can in the right locations. Identifying improvements to intersections where there are bottlenecks, being smart with the money where we do spend the money so that we're addressing a problem and not just doing flat-out widening of roadways. There are some very critical construction projects identified here, and we'll get to that in a minute. Those are important that we need to get those done. We also want to be clear that we are taking a shift in strategy here. The current plan has quite a few 6-lane projects in it. There'd be North 84th Street, some segments of O Street, Highway 2. Those projects right now, we've identified through our process that those are extremely expensive, and given the world that we live in with not enough funding to meet all the needs that we have, we are taking a different approach in this plan, which says we would do improvements on those roadways, but they would be focused on those intersections where they are in most need, perhaps as a second turn lane, things like that, as well as investing in the technology piece to this so that we can pump more traffic through those intersections along those roadways and at a lesser cost than the full-blown 6-laning. It's a shift in strategy. I want to be clear about that. But that is both a national trend as well as something that I believe will really help us here to spend our dollars more wisely.
Shouldn't that be somewhat of a technological and, strategy, but also data?
Yes.
I mean, if you're blowing up an intersection with, 5,000 cars more than capacity, you're going to widen it to 6 lanes, right?
That's a very good point, Trent, because one other point that is in here is that early on in the listing of projects, we show funding for a significant study of Highway 2, that being one of those projects. What we need to do is find out really what works best.
Yeah.
Now, if that study comes back and says, you absolutely have to 6-lane, and I'm sorry,
Yeah.
we're going to have to do that. And that means we're going to draw away money from other projects probably because it's going to be more expensive. But the expertise we've heard from in our process and what we've learned from other communities is that it's very likely that we'll be able to do more spot-specific improvements that actually improve the flow of traffic through those congested corridors. And that's really what we want to try to focus on.
Because even if the Bellway gets built, the traffic counts on Highway 2 are not really gonna dip too much.
They keep going up. They
Yeah.
don't go up as fast, and they don't, there's less truck traffic, which is a good thing.
Because you have so many growth areas.
Right.
On that one part of the circle, as John was calling it.
Right.
That those people are pushing to the east to go down.
Right. So that's a good point. We do have to be data-driven. That's really the point here about the technology.
Could you just summarize again what the strategy shift is?
I want to make sure I understand it.
Instead of assuming we're going to widen out to 6-lane on some of these major corridors that we already have, and that will show increasing traffic in the future, that we will be more strategic in what improvements happen on those corridors. So that instead of just saying we're automatically going to widen and it's going to cost X millions of dollars, it's going to be, let's study that, let's find out where the bottlenecks are and put the perhaps a fraction of that otherwise would be cost for widening into those improvements. And the idea there is that if you do save money by doing that and you improve the condition on those corridors anyways, you have that money left over to do other projects. I mean, that's really the point, so that you're getting more for your dollar.
Did you say you think most of the bottlenecks are at intersections? Focus on those?
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely intersection driven, yeah.
Specifically on Highway 2, do we know long-term what's going to happen with the railroad?
Good question. No, we don't.
Okay.
We know it's an active rail line right now. And so as we get into that study, there's going to have to be some assumptions on what do you do if and when that becomes a railroad that is no longer active. If it's still active, does it become more active? Right now, the information tells us that it's not going to be much more active, if at all, but it's still active.
So if it did go the other way, and became more active, then you would be looking at a whole different sort of
Yes.
approach to intersections.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, it could be a even bigger challenge. Yeah.
But they moved, I mean, along Highway 2, if the railroad moved, that right away, actually, pretty desirable, don't you think?
Yes.
And for us, I mean, that would be the right place for us to go if we were gonna go 6 lanes there. And that railroad really isn't all that active, I mean, you're not.
It's not active, but we can't
Yeah.
do anything about it right now, I guess. Yeah.
Active is when I lived over there.
Okay.
Well, most they used it for was just storage, some boxcars a few years ago.
But when they crashed 2 trains against each other.
We keep moving along here. On page 7 of your summary handout, this is the breakdown of big programs. That this is the level of detail we get into in the LRTP. But we'd like to point out here that the largest circle of amount of funding proposed in the rehabilitation for the streets, as well as the ongoing operations and maintenance of the street system. Not only is that currently the biggest single source of need, but we're proposing it be as such in the future, and actually increasing the amount of rehabilitation investment to maintain what we currently have, and that was the number one item that was identified through our process, to maintain what we have as best as possible. Just to be clear, again, it doesn't mean we're going to get to every single street exactly when we want to. That's not what this big circle means. It means we're going to do our best to get to the most critical needs when we should be getting to them. But I do want to just point out that is the number one item that was pointed out through our process. We also have the second largest being roadway construction activities. Those are the blue tones. That is a combination of a lot of different things. There's current commitments to developers. There's the projects that are already in our CIP that we are saying we're committed to and are assumed to happen in the next 6 years or so. We have new projects that are listed in the plan that we would get to by 2040. There are RTSD projects in there, getting back to railroad crossings. That funding source is for those types of projects, so they're kind of off to the side a little bit. But also there's intersection capacity and safety projects and 2+ center turn lane projects. So all those put together, that is the second largest investment level of the proposed plan. We also have alternative modes in there. Transit obviously being the largest piece to that, but also things like trail projects and other bike and ped, much smaller pieces of the total budget for that, but we identify those. And then there are other things, ongoing needs for engineering and studies, right-of-way acquisition. That is the gray smaller circle there. When you add all that up, that gets you to that $2.4 billion in big, large numbers. So getting a little bit into that with the time that we have left. So again, we're talking about the fiscally constrained portion of this. So it's the amount of money that we have and divvying it up in those bigger areas of investment that we just looked at. For maintenance, that is the ongoing operations and maintenance of the street system mainly. Road and bridge rehabilitation is in there. Trail rehabilitation is in there. This also includes things like snow removal and crack sealing and pothole response and maintenance. Alternative modes, that is transit, bike and ped, travel demand management, and trails. Those are the different pieces and parts that are assumed in there. Now, for trails, we did go through a process to prioritize and organize what trails we plan to get done by 2040. We can get about 55 more miles of trail, which is a great thing, on this map, and you have this in your handout on page 9. What you see in blue are more or less considered committed projects. Either they're already funded or they're showing up in the current CIP. So we're identifying those as being committed projects. The red are trail segments that we can afford to get done. And if you look through that and take a moment on it, you'll see what we attempted to do is kind of make critical connections as well as to extend out into our growth area, kind of those loops, so that you have a functional trail system out in areas that are growing and will be in the area of being built out by 2040. So it does make some sense. We feel good about that, and it's a good strategy to work forward from. For roadway construction activities, again, that has the highest prioritized capital projects for roads are listed there. The Railroad Transportation Safety District projects are in there. 2+ center turn lane, intersection safety and capacity. And so I would point to page 10 now. There's an inset map there, but you also have a handout. This, I think you'll have some interest in this. There's a packet, part of your packet is for the trails. I'll point you to another map here. Get this one out of the way. It'll be this map. This is the roadway map, prioritized roadway projects, as well as a listing of those projects. So it identifies what projects we have prioritized at the top of the list to get done by 2040. And so those are items that are very, very much needed. I will point out one specific follow-up on this. This is that alternative approach again. So these are the segments that in the current plan are saying to go to 6 lanes. What we're saying, though, is that when you look at, I'll go forward a little bit here. When you look at this map, those areas that are highlighted in blue, those are those areas for 6 laning and 1 4 laning along Van Dorn. The idea there is to put a level of effort and investment in for those intersection improvements and use of technology to make sure that we are maximizing the use of those roads while trying to mitigate the level of construction. So that is just, again, I want to make sure that you're hearing that and seeing that. What this map also tells us is that by 2040, the green on there is the amount of miles in our system that are still not congested. That's a pretty good story to tell right now. Part of it's because we have a grid system, and we've done a good job to date to have a grid system that's functioning well. We also are kind of a self-contained single city that can make good decisions, and we're not growing at crazy amounts. We're very steady, 1.2, 1.3% per year. So we compared to other cities, we actually can keep up with that growth better. Now, there is going to be an increase in congestion. There's no way around that. We're a growing community. We're going to be going over 400,000 people by 2040. We're not even at 300,000 yet today as far as the total county is concerned. This is something that we feel confident in, that between technology and focused improvements, that we can do a good job of meeting the needs of the future. This is, we did, yep.
Just out of curiosity, you mentioned 6 lanes there on O Street from Antelope Valley to 48. How can you do that? You've got, for example.
Very good question.
You've got the 2 cemeteries, for
There's
example, they're 40.
there's a big question mark that would hang over that topic all the time, because, I mean, you have the cemeteries there, and it would be very complicated. I'm sure there's a way to do it, but it gets even more expensive when you have those types of obstructions in the way. And so it might lead you to making a decision that we just shouldn't be doing the 6 laning, let alone cost. You probably, in a perfect engineering world, you probably would talk about having a second level roadway like they did in Omaha. But that's really expensive for one thing. But you probably would have to get into, at least explore the option of buying out areas of the cemetery, which probably not a lot of fun to do that. So those constraints really do limit your options, especially for cost-effective options, which is that's a good example of why we wanted to go in this direction of an alternative approach.
We have the same thing on South 27th Street.
Yeah.
A lot of it's 27.
Right. I mean, in any major widening through existing areas of the city is going to be very expensive if you really are going to widen out. You got to buy property, and it's expensive. I think I'll move on from there. Just to leave this one last point is that we don't have a plan that says we're not going to have congestion. We don't have a plan that says we're going to be able to solve all of our problems. What we're saying is that we have a network in the future that actually functions quite well for our community in the future, and we're trying to make our investments work the best, and we feel like we've got a plan that does that. This information is to let you know that we did take a look at what is the effect of the widening projects that we have in the plan, that we have, say, we can fund in the plan, and what is the effect of that alternative approach as well, if we can implement those intersection improvements and the implementation of more efficient technology. So what this is saying is that daily vehicle hours traveled, VHT, that's in 2040. The top number, the 201,000, is if we didn't do any of the projects at all. That's how much time people would be spending on the network on any given day. If we do just the widening projects, we can get about 650 hours off of that. And if we do the widening projects with that alternative approach, we feel like we can get another 650 hours, so about the same amount as those widening projects. So the point here is that it doesn't mean we're going to solve all of our problems, but we can actually get some benefits out of the approach that we're taking. The air quality analysis, I won't spend a lot of time on it. It's a requirement that our study look into this. We've done that. This is very good news in the sense that we do not anticipate being out of attainment for air quality by 2040. And in fact, the numbers actually go down, and mainly that's because the required fleet overhaul for fuel efficiency really takes hold going into the 2020s. And so once that happens, our air quality issues really start to be mitigated. There's a county portion to this. We are a county-wide MPO, and the plan looks at the full county. So we've been working with the county engineer's office on identifying what roads are highest priority. That is part of the plan as well. This has some interesting and important interactions with the growing parts of our community. Ruts is a topic of interest that we want to continue talking about that, but that is part of the plan. The state also has a part of the program. Obviously, they are committed to the South Beltway, which is a great thing. And we also have that project funded now in our 6-year CIP. State also has those 2 interchanges on 77 that are a funded project as well to go to freeway status at 77. The other projects at this point in time are only being listed, other state projects are only being listed in the what's called the illustrative plan, and that means that there is not a commitment to fund these other highly regarded state projects right now. They go more on a year-to-year basis of looking at those things. And other items that are in the illustrative plan that we cannot say right now that we can fund are the East Beltway. The East Beltway was a very highly thought of project in our process. We knew that going in, and we got that confirmed. We are showing the ongoing corridor preservation and funding that from the city's perspective at $250,000 a year to make sure that we get critical pieces and parts of that land so we have the corridor in the future. We are very specific, though, that is a project, that size project really needs state and/or federal funds to actually get that to happen. So it's in the plan as far as the corridor and the idea of the project, but the funding needs to come through on that still. Other items that are not funded in the fiscally constrained plan are further implementation of that transit development plan study that we just completed for StarTran, other than that first implementation, which is what we're about to see happen in October. Other things like more of that South Beltway trail. We are getting the part of that trail done in the fiscally constrained plan that is around the area that we expect to have development around by 2040, but other pieces would still not be done. So those are some examples of items that are on the illustrative plan and not formally funded. So next steps to wrap this up, have gone through a range of briefings to the necessary committees and elected officials. So we're very happy to have this time with you today to make sure you have this information. We will have the public review period from starting tomorrow all the way through October. Public meeting next Tuesday here in this room. And then what we would do is we would take all of those comments that we get and try to make sure that we are addressing those as best as possible with the final version that will come forward. LRTP will go to the Planning Commission and then to the MPO Technical Committee and then the Officials Committee, which you're represented by Lyrian and Roy on that committee. And then also we'll have the comprehensive plan come through, and that will be acted on both by the county board as well as the city council, that part of it. So I'll stop and I'll see if there's any final questions.
At one point in an MPO meeting, there was some discussion about your revenue assumptions and how accurate they are. I mean, it's obviously a guessing game, but to the extent you're looking at just current revenue sources, how often have you seen in the past new revenue source develop, and are there any that are more likely to go away?
We feel more comfortable now than we did about a year ago about the federal revenue sources because we have a multi-year legislation that's been approved at that level of government, so that we feel a little bit better about that. That was weren't really sure where that was going. There's a lot of discussion nationally now about even increasing the amount of investment into infrastructure, with transportation being a big part of that. So we feel like there might be opportunities for more to come down to the local level. We don't know. We don't assume that in the plan, but we feel like that is a possibility. At the state level, I think there's already ongoing conversations specifically about the East Beltway with the state and trying to have that still be on their radar for the next round of Build Nebraska Act and other possible opportunities there. So I think we need to keep working on those angles. And then on a local level, wheel tax has a history of increasing. We don't say exactly when that is to happen, but there is an assumption in the plan that every 5 or so years there is a bump in the wheel tax. So those are things that have to be discussed locally and made a decision on. But that is being one way to fund the program is things like that. I think bonding for transportation projects probably needs to be discussed. Just because I think it's a way to make sure we get a lot of work done in short amount of time and still be able to afford it if the decision is supportive of going in that direction. There is language in the plan about needing to have this type of conversation moving forward, that we need to make sure that we're talking about how do we fund the needs that we have moving forward. I think to not have those conversations would be kind of head in the sand type of feel to it.
Thank you
What are
very
your
much.
projections on wheel tax as far as percentage-wise, or you said every 5 years?
It does I think it is exactly every 5 years about another $5. And that creates a little bit over $1 million per year, which helps if you do that.
Do you have anything in there for other modes of transportation having some type of a user fee or tax?
We don't change the inherent assumption of some of the existing revenues, although I think that is a direction that a lot of this discussion is going about, coming around to much more of a direct user fee, a miles driven per vehicle type of fee. That's at the national level and state level as well, talking about those things. But we don't assume that in the plan.
Other modes of transportation?
Fees. Certainly, definitely on the table. I don't know how much revenue you'd get something. I don't know if you'd get big chunk dollars out of that, though, but we can talk about that.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your
the
time.
time and effort you put into this. Appreciate the briefing.